Hello, hello, hello. Once more into the breach. Dear fiends, it's been a while since we've saved the world, chunk by chunk, question by question. So I feel like it's time to get back into it. It's, what is it? It's December 23, New Year's Eve. Or as I like to call it, December 23. Anyway, yeah, it's been a while. We have some friends with us tonight. I'm excited for this first friend. I've never met this friend before, but we're going to try this out tonight. And if I can actually get this off, this should be exciting and perfect for a very cold winter's night. If you need a little warm you up, this is... You can see this here, and I can see it, and I can even read it. It's Hermit Thrush Rowdy Monk Barrel Aged Sour Brown Quadruple. So this has got a lot going on. It's a Belgian quad, which is typically brewed with a little bit of candied sugar and has a high alcohol level, a lot of complexity, but it's also a sorrow. It'll be happiness. No sorrow here. It's a sour, which is going to give it some sour edge to it, which is another Belgian does sour styles extremely well. Belgian sour style, and it's barrel aged, and I don't know if it's barrel aged in oak or what it's barrel aged in exactly. Maybe I can read it, perhaps. It's possible to actually read it. Well, the Surgeon General is going to tell me what it's aged on. You harness local wild cultures, barrels, in time to create balanced oak aged. So it is, yes, fodder or aged on oak barrels. Sour aged in oak quadruple. So there's so much going on right here. I've let it warm. I've let this thing warm up. It's now about 52.6 degrees. Oh, wait. Yep, I was right. About 52.6 degrees. Rule of thumb, and it's a very handy thumb because it'll almost always be a rule. As the alcohol in a beer goes up, you want to drink it warmer, commensurately with that raise in alcohol. There's probably also more complexity in a beer with a lot of alcohol. Plus, the alcohol itself has a warming feel that's more it's more present, and it kind of feels better when the beer gets warmer. And if it's too cold, you're going to taste the cold, and it's going to mask all the complexity in a beer. That anything over, I would say anything over 10%, unless maybe some kind of ice cave aged beer, or possibly like a maybe a few times of like heavy wheat beers. But for the most part, anything with alcohol like over 10%, warm that thing up, and some even room temperature is good. So that's our first friend. So I'm going to pour this thing, and you can have you can pour something too if you'd like to. You're more than welcome to do that. In fact, you can pour some sugar on someone if you really want to. That's what's hitting your mood right now, but you do you. All right, so I am pouring this thing. Oof. Poured about half this can out. Once again, this is and I'm just going to say, if my questions tonight are, well, they'll be perfect, but if the shine on the perfection isn't as bright as it is always, you can blame it on this beer. And if the shine is even a little bit shinier, you can thank this beer. So we will find out. What do we got here? Oh, wow. Holy smack. There's a lot going on here. You get the sour right away. You get some fruitiness in there. I get kind of a caramelly. I definitely get like a sugary, a little bit of a candy kind of feel to it. A dark fruit. bit of like a certain sourness, almost like the Duchess. A very what's the word I'm looking for? It'll hit me. Pickle juice. It's not quite pickle juice, but it's similar to that. Also very vinous or vinous or winey. Wow, there's just so much going on already. It's crazy. Well, okay. Never just judge a beer by the first sip. The first sip's to coat the tongue and the mouth to get you warmed up. It's the second sip. That's the whole rodeo. Holy cow. That's the whole freaking rodeo. There is so much going on there. Definitely a fair amount of sour in there. That's not it's not a light sour. There's a real sour punch to it. I might actually dial the sour back just a little bit if I had every little piece of my own ability to just change it slightly. But it is, there's so much going on there. There is definitely dark fruit, plum, other things that you can attach to words. There's there's almost a complete Rodenbach Grand Cru hidden inside this beer, which is Rodenbach Grand Cru is one of my favorite beers in the world. So there's a Grand Cru inside of this thing, like 86% of the Grand Cru. But then there's a whole nother layer of stuff going on. So very interesting for what is it? 14.5% alcohol. For that much alcohol to the alcohol is hidden pretty well. We'll see what happens when it warms up a little bit, if the alcohol comes out a little bit more. As of right now, I'm not really tasting the alcohol, but there's just so much else going on. A little bit of even like a strawberry on the nose a little bit. There's a lot. Strawberry, cherry. Definitely a vinegary, sour vinegar, like the kind of vinegar to it, but in a pleasant way. That oak, some of that oakiness is there, mostly for me in the finish, in the last part of it. but there is, you do it some of that oakiness and a little bit of a smooth kind of mouthfeel that I think you get kind of when you age something on oak. You get kind of that just anyway, tannins and definitely Gloucesterberry. A lot of Gloucesterberry. I hope that's a real thing. It is now. There's also Coca-Cola hidden inside of this. There's so much going on inside this thing right now. It's crazy. Anyway. Okay, so we met our first friend. Tasty. Have another friend that's decided to keep me company for the last, going on 6 weeks now. It's a good friend I call Tiny Tin Tinnitus. Yeah, he does not ever leave my side. So, I always know I'm alive because he's around. Gotta love it. What else do we have? That's who we got right now. It is, yes, it's December 23rd. It's almost Christmas. The apocalypse is start to enter a new stage, I think, right now. Our politicians are doing a wonderful job navigating the COVID-19. We've come together in a country in a way, as a family, as one family, like you've never seen before. It's amazing. I knew it would happen. I just didn't know it would take a virus like this to really bring us all together. Yeah. So here we are. Anyway, let's go back to saving the world. And I think we left off at if I can do the magic here. Oh, magic. David Pizarro. A little side note: I went to the MoMA recently here in New York, and don't think I saw any Pizarros, but I saw some Picasso. He's always an interesting fellow to look at his work. Something tells me if Picasso wasn't going to be an artist and a painter, he would have been he would have sold insurance, I think. That's what I get out of his work. David Pizarro is Associate Professor of Psychology at Cornell University. And David Pizarro's last question, this again stems from 2018. Or earlier. David Pizarro's last question is, are we smart enough to know when we've reached the limits of our ability to understand the universe? Well, oh boy. I want to say, because it's a bit of a cliche, but I want to say it anyway, it's like, who is this we you're talking about? The obvious, of course, question is humanity, but what happens when the exploration is, most of the hands-on exploration is done by the freaking AI machines that we invent and the algorithms that we just let grow and inhabit space? Like, is that a different, what if their answer is different from what we humans have, or, we're playing around with the tools of the gods. Drama. Anyway, well, we certainly don't know the answer to this question now, because I think we only know now that we haven't reached our limits of our ability to understand the universe as of yet. We've never come across this epistemological crevasse in our past. Has there ever been another human culture that we can look back and say, "Oh, they figured they decided they figured it all out," and then that well, couldn't you say that of like 1300 A.D. or so Turkish Muslim culture, where they kind of just said, you know, ours is not to reason why, ours is to do and die. Uh, well, they basically, if I know my history, and I probably don't, but if I do, one of the imams or whatever basically just said, kind of, hey, it's not our job to figure out why a candle works. It's to use the candle to be in service to whoever, So if I'm right about that, then that's maybe one example of somebody just saying we're done figuring stuff out. And that, I think, for the most part, you would say didn't go as well as other ways of navigating reality. Excuse me a moment. And we're back at it. So, we probably weren't smart enough then. We aren't in any spot right now where we can say, yeah, that's going to be a hard question to solve, because are we ever going to, what is the moment where you could possibly say, oh, we've figured out everything there is to figure out? Are we going to get to the point where we can, with a very satisfactory exploration of what we know about physics and all of the different models of mathematics that works, that we can just be like, okay, yep, this is how the universe started. This is why it started. These are the conditions that were met. This is why those conditions get met in the universe of possibility. And then we can explain, we can have good confidence of everything that's happened in our past, and can explain why it happened, and can explain, because if we can't get that far, aren't we always going to be looking for more to get us that far? Are we gonna find a what we recognize as like a hard limit? It's like this far and no further. It's like you can't see over that horizon. It's some type of information paradox, or something where we'll just be like, oh, it's the Planck length of knowledge, we'll call it, where we just that's it and no further, and we know why we can't go further. So another way to think of it is, maybe will we be smart enough to recognize when we can't go any further? Because now we think of the Planck length as kind of like this ultimate small scale, but I don't think that really is. I think it's what our models allow us to conceive of, the smallest unit that the models that we currently have would allow us to conceive of. But I think even a physicist would say that there's, I'm going to try and talk like a physicist, that they would concede that the Planck length may not be any type of ultimate limit. It's just the way the models we have that work right now, that's the limit, but it's not necessarily the limit. So as we work to just discover new math, which I think that's just the universe is just unfolding of math. It's the manifestation of mathematics. Anyway. Will we get an ultimate plank length of understanding where it's just like we can't. Why does this keep doing this? It's getting me mad. All right, time out just 1 second. Good folks, we're back. Technical glitches. We're smart enough to know when we reach the limits room. Okay, now we were talking about how we're going to get the kind of a plank length, which we of our limits or whatever, or we just can't look past it, and we understand why we can't look past it, and that explanation is satisfactory. That's we're just like, yep, that makes sense. We know why it makes sense. That's this far and no further. Man, that's I feel like it's such a long way away that more of the oak. Sour really, really present on the front end. The oak and the little butteriness and starts to come in on the backside. That's the whole clown show right there. That's a lot going on. Anyway, are we smart enough to know when we've reached our limits? That seems so far down the line. Oh, the easy answer could be no, but we will be. Because it's been said before by lesser men than I. But humanity, at least at this moment in time, seems to be very clever, but not very wise. The question being asked here is about wisdom, not cleverness. Another way to think of it is, will we ever even out on will our ability to be wise catch up with our technical prowess, with our ability to be clever, to make new tools and to do new cool things? Will we ever become wise enough to govern that instinct, tame that beast, understand that technology has its uses, but be able to kind of control, markets and other things that we use in technology, because we just know, okay, this is what's really good for us. I don't think we want to do that, honestly. I wouldn't trust anybody that thought that they were smart enough to do that. So that makes me think maybe we don't ever get smart enough, and that might be a good idea. I don't know. I think part of wisdom is the understanding that there's certain things that you don't want to give, you don't want to control, at least not 100%, because it's the control itself that may just some things aren't meant to some things, I know why the cage bird sings, some things aren't meant to be controlled, and there are maybe just processes of trying to understand that process may not be something that we want to just be like, okay, we're going to put this under control and stop and tame it. So, son of a don't know why this keeps doing this, but it's starting to annoy me. But it's not going to stop me from dotting the T and crossing the I on this question here. So I guess my answer to your question, David Pizarro, Associate Professor of Psychology at Cornell University, the answer that I have to your last question is, are we smart enough to know when we've reached the limits of our ability to understand the universe? When our wisdom starts to catch up with our cleverness, I think part of that wisdom is having the epistemic humility and the maybe the human humility to say we're not going to try and shut stuff down even when we think, and we've got very good reasons to say we've closed it off. It may just be that the quest of humanity is the quest for knowledge and the quest of exploration, and that's just fundamental to humanity. And so in that way, the smarter we get, maybe the wiser we get, we'll still always just see that. We'll understand that it's kind of like that's the ultimate fingerprint of what humanity is to explore, is to question, is to try and find truth, try and find whatever it is. So I think part of the wisdom of our humanity will be to understand that we don't put hard limits on it, even if we got an explanation that just comes down and makes sense, whatever, we'll still explore. We should explore. We are explorers. We're never, you don't ever put baby in a corner like that. we gotta keep going after it. So that's my answer. We'll never be that smart, but we might be that wise. But we won't stop, can't stop. Okay, who do we got next here? Thank you for that interesting question, David Pizarro. Who do we have next here? We have next, let's just see if that's working. Whoops. Everything worked, but see if that worked. Oh, I'm so good. I'm so good. Except for this is Robert Plomin, who's a professor of behavioral genetics at King's College London and author of Blueprint. And Robert Plomin's last question is, how far will we go in predicting human behavior from DNA? I want to go and just qualify this a little bit, because there's DNA, there's the reading of the DNA, which is epigenetics, which I think is finding out, well, very important. I mean, in one aspect, you can think of all of human, let's say, prenatal development as an exercise in epigenetics. Epigenetics is basically, so you've got a human cell, and there's all different types of cells, but each cell has an encoding of all of the genetic program to create humans. So every single cell, skin cell, liver cell, cancer cell, white blood cell, all the different cells in your bodies have the blueprints to create any type of cell in the body whatsoever. And but how you get specialization and the actual differentiation of different cells and building of the body is through epigenetics, which is basically how the system reads the DNA, ignores some part, basically doesn't read this chapter, doesn't code for this, even though it's there. So epigenetics is part of it as well. And so I would say that But does epigenetics impact human behavior? At the young level, it must, because when you're still developing, and epigenetics is that program that kind of builds bodies at that young. But as an adult, would epigenetics be part of? I still think there has to be room for it. It's interesting when you start. It's like, how do you define, in what metrics do you define human behavior? And say, okay, the female chimpanzee led her fellow female chimpanzees to this store of food and basically whatever behavior that is. How do you map that onto how do you break down that behavior in what characteristics of that behavior? Because we just put a sentence together there, yeah. But how do you contextualize what happened there in a way that you can kind of map it to the DNA? I guess you put sentences together and they accumulate. They're called behavior. I don't want to get too start getting too frickin' how language is constructed and stuff. You can get way down a hole and never go anywhere with this. Man, there's so much going on in that thing. It's the whole buffet. I was listening to a behavioral geneticist who thought that basically, I think he said like around 70% of behavior could be explained via differences in DNA, differences in genetics. It doesn't mean determined. It doesn't mean there's no other way, but just like, you look at groups, look at different behavior, look at their underlying genetics, look at the different stuff, and you're just like, okay, yeah. And if that's 70%, I struggle to think that we would be able to explain less as our techniques for investigating this and our understanding of DNA grows more complete, that we would be able to explain less of behavior through it. It feels like we would be able to explain more and more, although it could be that what we think we are doing to predict human behavior via DNA, there's other stuff in there that we're calling DNA that's a little bit different, and we're just confusing ourselves a little bit. That's possible. But I think it's more likely that if it's, say this guy is a little ambitious because that's his field or whatever, and that's more like 50% now. If it's 50% now, it could go up to 70, 80, 90, whatever. I mean, it's kind of freakish. If you're thinking about like free will and stuff, but then you're just like, yeah, we have free will, but yeah, not if you have that allele, not if you have a GC where you're supposed to have a CC or a whatever, you know what I'm talking about. I don't want to bore you with the details of amino acid. Sexy time. what happens when more and more of our behavior is not as rooted in biology and in the biological processes? So if we're spending, 80%, in 20 years we're spending 80% of our time in some kind of virtual world, on the moon of Saturn, or at least this virtual world looks like Io with rings around it, and we're, so the behavior is, more and more and more in our mind, and as a construct of what's in our mind and aided by technologies. So we're kind of, in a way, going farther and farther and farther from the biological processes. Wouldn't that make it more tenuous, more difficult, more whatever, to explain that type of behavior in terms of genetics? Because there's a hell of a lot more synapses than there are genes. And the complexity of mental behaviors may not map as much as the complexity of physical behaviors. So, are we going to call being in a virtual world and playing, lawn darts on Io the same type of behavior as playing a game on terra firma, on planet Earth? Or how are you gonna hierarchicalize and contextualize behavior that's done more virtually, or that's done? Are you so how do you categorize that behavior even? So I think you're going to start getting problems in defining human behavior that's more centered around virtualization of ourselves inside of other realities. Like, how do you even define that behavior? I guess you can still just say, whatever, if you want to plant a cornfield in Kansas, or but Kansas is in Iowa, not Iowa, and you're doing that on a virtual world where you're on a couch, and say there's 19 other people that want to do the same thing, and they've got crazy enough, 82% of those 19 other people have a very uncommon allele on, chromosome 14, blah, blah, blah. I guess maybe you could still just do it that way. You just describe the behavior, even if it's virtual, and then just say, okay, can we map it to genes? I feel, though, that the more that I do feel that there's something that the more that we go away from just the biological stuff that got us here, as we're virtualizing ourselves and doing that stuff, it's going to be harder to predict the intricacies of that behavior via DNA. Well, what else is there? It seems randomness is a feature of the universe. It seems like there is some randomness that isn't just what we've put over the word ignorance. Like, it's not really noise, but we don't understand it yet, so we'll call it noise. It seems like there is some fundamental noise in the universe. So DNA is not going to predict that at some level. It could still predict statistically, even with the noise. And that's what it does. I swear to God, if this does this one more time, I'm going full Amish. It's annoying the crap out of me. So what do we talk about? We talked about more than just DNA, that epigenetics is involved. Probably more in predicting human behavior. There might be still a role for that, but most of it's in the DNA itself. It's in the it's in the recipe, not the mechanism that ignores some of the recipe and blah blah blah. Mostly. How complex is DNA? 20,000 genes. What's the complexity in your average gene? Couldn't you theoretically map the level of complexity, or trace out the level of complexity by looking at DNA and just say, hey, this codes for instructions. How deep does this level of this, how deep is that code network, or how deep is that instruction set? How deep can it go? So you would answer these questions from like first principles instead of from post facto looking at behavior. You could just look at the DNA code and say, what can this do? And then you say, well, there's some edges to the DNA code which are influenced by or predicated upon different chemical or something like that. So maybe you have to add in some variability there. You add in some other logic switches or something like that. But you could just look at the level of kind of the code of DNA in itself, turn it into JavaScript or Python or something, and just say, oh well, this is what it can do because we've just built this thing. So I think that might be that you could go back to first principles and not have to do you could figure it out a priori and just be like, this is what it can explain. This is the type of behavior it can explain. And then you say, if you've got your model, and then you say, oh, well, wait a second. There's these other, it's not saying it can explain this, but yet it can explain why some people like neon surfboards. Then that would lead me to think that our conceptualization of how we are relating things in the physical universe to how our DNA looks at those things, it's a translation issue. It's a how does our DNA, conceptualize baseball teams? And again, how deep are you going with behavior? Because physical behavior is one thing, but once you start getting into the mind, like how how deep of a level of behavior do you want to go at? How are you going to describe human behavior that that description is necessary to be able to predict? He's just like, okay, this is the level of behavior that we're going to get down to, and how much can be predicted in this tree. Excuse me. Okay, because like maybe genetics could statistically say why I enjoy beer, but but was it going to know that I was going to do this when that's something I don't normally do? I mean, how deep down this rabbit hole of behavior do you want to go? What constitutes behavior? What's your model of behavior? Once you start going deeper than like, Skinnerian or something like that, or so, but we do need an answer for Robert Plomin, who's asked a very interesting question. How far will we go in predicting human behavior from DNA? I think, Robert Plomin, that answer to that is going to depend very largely on how we are describing behavior. Kind of said it before, but, you know. Is it conscious behavior? Like, okay, maybe DNA is good at predicting how many times in a 24-hour period people eat, or differences in that will correlate with specific genetic differences very well. Fair enough. Okay, so that's behavior. But inside of that, when is behavior also what you're thinking about when you're eating? Is it is it the thought bubbles that come up, and how do you translate stuff that isn't just a physical known thing into a language of what we call human behavior, that we can then put that on our map of prediction? I think we will start in running into more. Maybe we'll have our Planck length or whatever of predictability when we start talking more and more about behavior that is mental models, representations, virtualizations, all that stuff. I'm kind of going back and forth, but I'll just say it again. I think that's where we kind of will start running into just genetics won't be there because the code won't be able to describe that level of complexity. I think that's where probably where randomness plays more of a role. Quantum effects might play a role. So the answer, Robert Ploman, to your question is physical behavior will probably get pretty far, but due to language and context and definitions and just even trying to translate what someone's virtualized, what going on, what up in here, into a common model of language of behavior that we can even place predictions or not predictions for and against. I think it's going to be difficult translationally, be difficult. That's where we run into our this far and no further. I think when we talk about behaviors that are just kind of like in the head. So that's where we're going to run into our problem until we start finding languages that are better than language that we need. We need a whole new conception of communication technologies that are better than language. Until we have that, we're going to have a very hard time getting into the mind. That is, I think, probably, if I said anything of value, I think it's that last part. If I said anything of value, I think it's that last part, because that actually I can own, because there are certain times in certain situations as it warms, it just kind of balances out a little better. Certain times in certain situations where you realize the utter inadequacy of language as a communicative tool. And that is, sometimes I can have that experience looking at a beautiful landscape or something like that, where you can at least point someone else to it. There are other moments which are only internal, that have nothing really to do with anything, that are happening with my eyes closed, that are happening either in dreams or in psychedelic experiences or things like that, that you almost laugh at the inadequacy of language to communicate, even to yourself, the faintest glimpse of what's actually going on. And so until we get some more kind of direct or a much, language 2.0 or communication technologies 2.0 that are much better than English or Farsi or whatever, that's going to be a big bottleneck right there. Because even though genetics is played out in a culture in which languages are used, that's not the level of probably informational depth that is conveyed, and so they need like a third, like something underlying that to get a richer set of conceptualizations of the potentialities for DNA to be predicting behavior that isn't predicated upon the feeble manifestations of our ability to communicate at the present moment. So, we need new and better languages, Robert Plomin. That'll help out and get us well above the 70% we might be at right now, which is still kind of crazy. So, thank you for that very interesting and completely 100% answered correctly last question. Where are we next? We are, see if we got that. See if I still got the magic working. Pretty much, yes. Next, last question is from Jordan Pollock, who is quite the drinker, quite the painter. That was Jackson Pollock. Jordan Pollock, who is the professor and chairman of computer science at Brandeis University, and perhaps maybe something else, although just being professor and chairman of computer science at Brandeis University is impressive enough in itself, but I will see if there's anything after that. And that's it. That's all he is. Skipping this shit. Jordan Pollock's last question is, will blockchain return us to the golden age of ownership of information licenses that can be resold like books and records? This is interesting because I'm not an expert in blockchain. I've looked into it a little bit, and I think it will transform a fair amount of how we do interactions, banking, some types of finance, around the globe, transactions. It will transform our need and our conceptualizations of trust. Will it I might take a little bit of issue with this idea of the golden age of ownership of information licenses that can be resold in books and records. Because who is it a golden age for? When information just travels freely, that may not necessarily be good for the creator, although you could certainly make arguments that it can be if you can ride that wave correctly. You could still use it to your advantage. But let's say it is a net negative for the creator, and that they don't get all the a 1-to-1 return on their intellectual input, because stuff just gets put out for free and stuff like that. But then the masses may benefit from just free information flow everywhere, and free information flow everywhere and a lot of stuff is the things that can potentially generate and be a catalyst for. So I'm gonna just say I'm not quite so sure that if blockchain did return us to that, it would necessarily be a golden age. That it would necessarily be better for culture or whatever. Certainly be better for a few, but I don't know if it'd be better for the masses if we went back to something where we could, really track, restrict, copyright became a real strong thing, and I'm not sure that would be better than where we're at. And I'm also thinking that when there's a will, there's a way. So I kind of feel like, as I'm sure as technologically sound and as sophisticated and as logically coherent as blockchain technology will be able to protect some stuff, there's going to be a hack, you know, some networks that aren't on blockchain, and so you can dial into whatever using what browser, and you can still get all this stuff for free because, you know, somebody made it and blah blah blah. Friend is still here. So I'm thinking that there's still going to be like at least gray markets of just like gray markets of free, which is the craziest shit. But yeah, I mean, you know, limeware or whatever, the, you know, pirate stuff. I have a hard time seeing us just return to just boom. You just, you know. I think there's a certain extent to which the cat is out of the bag on, you know. One thing that would be nice though is might let us escape from this model that we have now of just like, hey, well, you know, it's you know, the information's free, but you know, you gotta sell your soul to the advertisers and the market based on all this stuff, which is, you know, not exactly a premium solution to all this stuff. Got to sell that Hanes underwear and, you know, Colgate extra soda powder, blah blah blah, to try and get your point across. That's kind of a marriage made in hell, but it may be a better hell than just the creator having just strict universal control. I don't like that solution either. So the answer to your question, Jordan Pollock, is no, because one, if it returns us somewhere like that, it's not really going to be a golden age. I really don't think it's that much better than where we're at. But two, I also think that there is always going to be someone hacking around the edges, you know. There's always going to be gray and black markets for whatever. And even if you're not making money off it, you know, somebody, you know, information wants to be free. Information wants to be free as much as we want to profit off it, and things want to get out. Things don't want to be jailed for too much. So, love will find a way. So yeah, I think that's always going to happen, and it's certainly, blockchain will definitely, I think, revolutionize a fair amount of how we kind of do business, and how we shake hands on so many different levels. But I think there's at the edges anyway. There's going to be, you know, there's going to be stuff outside of that, and the things are going to want to be free. Information wants to be free. So thank you for that interesting question. I'm bailing through them. I believe I'm over about 230 for 230 if I've got the numbers right now. I'll check it out. But 230 for 230 isn't bad. I mean, that's like over 90%. So next, we've got Alex Poots. Alex is the artistic director and CEO of The Shed. And is that the structure in London? Or I'm not even sure. I've got to think about that. And then ask Jeeves. Alex Poots' last question is, will artistic invention enlighten the age of AI? I'm trying to get my hands around exactly what that question could mean, because enlighten, shed light on, could be one thing. Shed light on could be enlighten as to just bring a more pleasure, abundance, a more of a Genevieve, just more of a making living less of an encumbrance. The bearable lightness of being could be enlightened that way. The age of AI. So, what is the age of AI? Still trying to wrap my thoughts around that question. What I do think is that the age of AI is going to, I don't want to say unweave the rainbow, but the age of AI is going to enlighten our ideas of creativity and artistic invention. And I'm very confident about that. There's this idea that human creativity is this unique thing, and it may be that human creativity is unique, but I think it's kind of just a species of a more general creativity that is. I don't think creativity is. I would just put it this way. I think AI is going in, but I think math plus architecture can produce creativity. Because I think math plus the right architecture can create metaphor. And I think metaphor lies at the root of creativity. And what we would see as artistic expression, that we would just see that. And I don't think if we do it right, I don't think we're that far off in replicating what we would kind of see as a type of creativity in AI, and that may throw the math or the art world in a loop a little bit. And if it works out right, there could be some real positives gained and some real incredible work that could be done. I think also there's going to be likely to be a guaranteed source of tension there, as the digital world increasingly encroaches upon areas that we thought were once just only human endeavors, and maybe human creativity being the ultimate, or at least besides just what's in the conscience, the manifestations of Beethoven and Bach and Botticelli and Bruce, being kind of like the most singular creative acts we could think of. When all of a sudden we've got an AI program that is creating things that we would think, if you put a human name on it, it's like, that's really good. I think there's definitely going to be some friction between the traditional art world and technological creativity. I think that's going to happen for sure. I think many of the new artists will, of course, be working in the medium of the age, so it will be working in visualizations, virtualizations, created worlds, created realities, new physics and worlds, that type of stuff. The concept of psychedelics, AI, and art maybe a triage that would be very interesting as well. Also, what do we want to, what's the fences we want to put around artistic invention? Because what would be like conceptualizing a new seeing humanity as part of a hive mind, as a network, as a just reconceptualizing what we think of as humanity, which certainly is the territory of the arts, definitely. Um, is that artistic invention? Depends how you do it, right? Because isn't also just what's the hard line between artistic invention and philosophical insight, new insights? Is what's the Venn diagram of Aristotle and Dali? Like what? Certainly, inventions, concepts, whatever that use just looking at the world in different ways and conceptualizing things differently. But where is that? How much of that is art and how much of it is just how much of the play of the mind? If it's conceptual art, do you still need the unmade bed there? Or if you're thinking of the concept and you apply it to something else, then it's just the concept. Then it's philosophy, I guess, maybe. Is that kind of the thing? Art needs a medium. Whereas philosophical conceits are thrown up against the whole world. So the question, Alec Poots, the answer to your last question, which is, will artistic invention enlighten the age of Al? Well, I don't know who this Al guy is, but I like art. So there you go. Thank you for the question. Next we have, I'm somewhat familiar with this human. Carolyn Porco was a planetary scientist at Cassini, imaging team leader, and director at director Cyclops and or Kiclops, Space Institute at Boulder, Colorado. Carolyn Porco is planetary scientist at the Cassini imaging team leader, director of Cyclops, Space Institute, Boulder, Colorado. Carolyn's last question is, what will it take for us to be fully confident that we have found life elsewhere in the cosmos? Did we kill it? Then we'll know. It's a crazy beer. Well, let's take a case where we're not fully confident, right? Where it's maybe a maybe, like somebody we've discovered or at least seen on, I don't know, Mars. Is it rocks from satellites, meteorites? Yeah, satellites, meteorites or something like that. That, or whatever, that we're like, well, it could potentially be fossilized, whatever, and it's really hard to tell. It feels like it would be, if something like fossilized or left some type of fingerprint, imprint, or whatever. I feel like that would be more difficult from an empirical perspective, because if it only left a footprint, then we'd have to, even though we might make a ton of very logical, valid assumptions about what left that footprint, we still could say, you know what, could have been the craziness of random forces, throwing together, whatever. Hey, hoodoos look like they were designed by somebody. I don't think so. So I think we would have more luck, or it'd be easier if we found something that was extant. If we could kind of like read its code, read its operating system, find an operating system, find their version of DNA in the system, and just be like, oh, it's got an operating system, so it has to be life. Like if we could, because we can't even be totally confident necessarily of life even on the Earth, right? Because there's some edge cases. What about viruses? They're not kind of really alive, but they have code, and you put them in the right environment, they can be alive. Really love my redneck. I'm a redneck. Anyway, so even on Earth, the edge cases can be kind of difficult. Is the idea of, non-random conservation of randomly varying replicators. It's the Darwin/Dawkins definition of evolution. If we found evolution that way, I think that would allow us to be fully confident. So would life be contingent upon finding an evolutionary process? Can you have life without evolution? What if we advance to the point where we've loosed ourselves from these mortal coils and are living in as much as our consciousness could be alive, but we're in clouds of silica or something, or we're, we've thrown off evolution as a as our, what's in the background. Could you have creatures that no longer evolve that are still alive? I mean, the question that wants to be answered, yes, of course, but I'm not sure that that's the case. But it's likely to be the case that you could at least conceive of a population that had kind of just like, oh, we've done our evolving, we understand that, we're done with that now. We're just going to take in sunlight and sit on the beach and not change at all. And then could that be somehow dispersed into into an environment at a level where it's somehow distributed enough so that we don't even see it for anything. That instead of that being ET that doesn't evolve, then that's just become I think so. Maybe it needs to be organized complexity. Yeah, but complexity compared to what? Another way to think about it, just like, find something that's hacking entropy. And it does it 3 times a row, it's alive. What the hell is fully confident? Fully confident seems like a funny phrase. Because that doesn't sound like 99.9, that sounds like 100. The hell do we know for 100% of anything? But we'll say it's 99. We'll say it's Six Sigma. It's probably a term she might be more familiar with. I think we're going to have to use evolution as our kind of as our proof. We're gonna have to be like, okay, this thing operates in an evolutionary manner, or in the evolutionary marketplace. It replicates. Not every part of it survives, or not every part of it grows, or whatever, or it divides, or what have you. You know, and it hacks. It converts some type of energy into another type of energy for its processes, for its so it does that. So it converts energy, and it plays in the playground of evolution. I think once we can define and make sure that something does those two things, then I can say, yes, you've got life. Could we think of things that convert energy and plays in the evolutionary playground or by the evolutionary rules that isn't life as we could say it even now? Well, we've got lots of things that convert energy. Even simple batteries convert energy. Viruses don't necessarily convert energy, but they contain the instructions for how to do that. They just hijack somebody else's factories. So it's possible that may be too exclusive. There may be forms of life that don't add up to that, but are still forms of life. That sourness is really strong there now. Whew. So, Carolyn Porco, your last question is, what will it take for us to be fully confident that we have found life elsewhere in the cosmos? And I'm going to say, it's got to transform energy for its own uses somehow, and it's got to play in the playground of evolutionary that context. That doesn't mean that's the only definition of life, but I think we're going to have to use that as the baseline for being confident enough that will allow us to still be epistemically humble enough, because we're putting two very big bricks on the wall. If we say that, yeah, it's gotta use energy, and it's gotta play in the playground of evolutionary processes, and if we can say, yes, this thing is living, and then we'll probably after that find other things that maybe don't necessarily consist of both of those, but still might be life. But yeah, we got to get those. That will make us confident that we found life elsewhere in the cosmos. And I think it might happen in my lifetime. I just got to get around that pesky speed of light bullshit. Speed of causation bullshit. Okay, next. Thank you for that interesting question, Carolyn Porco. Next we have we've got here we've got here William Poundstone, who is a journalist, author of The Doomsday Calculation, and nominated twice for the Pulitzer Prize. Well, that ain't too shabby, quite honestly. So congratulations, William Poundstone. I'm only 2 behind you on the Pulitzer Prize nominations. Watch out. And I don't write anything either. William Poundstone's last question is, does the infinite multiverse of cosmologists, in which all that is physically possible occurs, contain realizations of our unruly paradoxes of infinity? Hilbert's Hotel, Thompson Lamp, 1, 2, 3 plus 4. I'm going to try and understand what I think he's talking about. I'm going to say unruly paradoxes of infinities. Like when you talk about infinities, sometimes they just don't even make any sense. Like I've read about some of them, and they're just crazy. And infinities they seem to operate on their own type of landscape of logic that is devoid of, or so alien to the uninfinite world that it's just freaking crazy. So basically it sounds like he's saying, can God lift a rock that is too heavy for him to lift? Like if everything exists, not to go anyway, but I'm just trying to make it a little easier for me to think about. If everything exists, do logical contradictions exist? Is maybe a less sexy and less sophisticated version of this, but I'll just kind of use that as a proxy for a moment to see where it gets me. Is this supposed to be cosmologies? Does the infinite multiverse of cosmologists, I want to say cosmologies, but anyway, in which all that is physically possible occurs. Well, can contradictions physically exist in even our world and even the world that we see? Because physically exists is different than conceptually exist, or a physical manifestation seems to me, yeah, but if the universe is just nothing but math and we're just riding math, so can God lift up a rod too heavy for him to lift up? Is there a universe which contains a God that can lift up a rock that's too heavy for him to lift up? Can contradictions physically manifest themselves? Can logical contradictions physically manifest themselves? Logical, physical. What is the relationship of the logical to the physical? Is there something at the base level of logical, physical, that concept that tells us? It's like saying, does everything if everything physically possible occurs, can logically impossible things spring up? Or, I mean, I don't want to say that Hilbert's Hotel and Thompson's lamps are logically impossible, because it sounds like I would think they're logically necessary, but physically impossible. Or they don't seem to be physically possible. Or their physical manifestation does not seem possible. It may be, I wonder if it's that they do physically manifest, but there's something about subjectivity or something that you can't create 6 impossible things before breakfast. You can think of them, but you can't create them. So they may be somehow, there may be some kind of like logical, physical like Big Bang type thing, or where we can't see beyond the singularity of the physical to be able to manifest the logical that we can't. That isn't conceptually computable or something. I don't know. Put that into an Excel formula. Does this infinite multiverse of cosmologists, when I see cosmologists, I wanna say that that's a human, which I don't think is necessarily what the good sir meant. That's how I keep reading it. And so I'm thinking if the multiverse is cosmologists, that's just throwing me for a loop. I don't think I'm thinking of that. I don't think I'm able to think of this in exactly the way that William Poundstone is thinking of it. I'm hacking it. I'm hacking my way through it, trying to clear out the underbrush of my own ignorance a little bit. Does the multiverse mean that every logical possibility has to manifest physically. Just approaching this from, oh, no, it's grab the leg, grab the trunk, grab the tail. It's still the elephant. Could you have an infinite multiverse and call it infinite, but where things are logically capable that aren't physically expressed? Or is that just kind of the definition we're talking about the multiverse? Is that everything that can happen does happen? So, William Poundstone, the answer to your last question, which is, does the infinite multiverse of cosmologists, in which all that is physically possible occurs, contain realizations of our unruly paradoxes of infinity, Hilbert's Hotel, Thomson's Lamp, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc.? Thomson's Lamp, of course, we all know that is going to manifest itself, but not for Hilbert's Hotel, for reasons that are. Just go back a few minutes and it'll be obvious when you just go back to that part. Of course, not in Hilbert's Hotel. You can check it any time you like, but you can never leave infinity. Hilbert's Hotel will exist only in logical space, which means that collapses the universe down to the multiverse down to a universe. And I'm going to stop talking because I'm running out of words. So, thank you for that interesting question, William Poundstone. Let's see if I got one more in me. Hang on one second here. Okay. Next, we have William H. Press. William H. Press is the Warren J. and Viola M. Raymer Chair in Computer Sciences and Integrative Biology at the University of Texas at Austin. And William H. Press's last question is, what quirk of evolution caused us to develop the ability to do pure mathematics? I like the question better is what quirk of mathematics gave us the ability to use evolution to hack entropy? To harness and corral energy. Anyway, no. I'm going to answer the question that William asked, if I can. Of course I can. I'm 233 for 233. Frickin' Nobella's garbage. What quirk of evolution caused us to develop the ability to do pure mathematics? First time we threw a spear. What quirk of evolution caused us the ability to do pure mathematics? Where does mathematics start? Does it start with numbers? Does it start with relationships? Does it start with 1, 2, 3, or does it start with plus, minus? Is exist, not exist part of mathematics? No, I think exist is a prerequisite for doing any types of mathematics, and it's not a well, how far back can we say we were doing pure mathematics? If you're counting how many bales of hay at the harvest, is that pure mathematics? I guess, right? If you are taking care of your offspring and you realize you're missing one, is that pure mathematics? Son of a... Why does it keep doing this? I'm annoyed with you, Sony. We've got to do some definitions here. What is pure mathematics? Is it an exploration in a type of landscape that doesn't need to be connected to anything on Earth? You know, we can take, okay, 4 bales of hay that I needed to sell or whatever, and then it's like 4. Then it's like, okay, well, what is this number taken away from anything about the physical realization of it that I can do with this number, and how can I play with it, and what can it say? You know. So you could just go, ooh, okay. So maybe we got it from the physical world, but then we use it totally for own uses, which could have nothing to do with it. If that's pure mathematics. Is the quirk of evolution just abstraction in itself? Is evolution a child of mythology? I don't mean that to somehow denigrate mathematics. It might sound like that, but I guess I'm trying to ask if our ability to kind of mythology, religion are kind of like, let's just say, like narrative structures that are almost like meta truths, or they are in the way an abstraction, which is more true, more of an idealization than the thing itself. They are, Peterson talks about that, but that idea of just is there something where our ability to become storytellers still got half this beer left. I should try and answer this after I'm done with the rest of this beer. Then it would go perfectly smoothly. It's that moment where I want to go back to the spear throwing, because what I'm thinking of, it's just like, because it's like, you throw a spear, you have to just, there's some part of you that's got to be like, okay, I'm throwing it here because this thing's here, but it's going to be here. And so you've got to conceptualize space and time in some way that all of a sudden you have to start thinking about I don't know, I almost feel like you have to almost abstract these ideas of space, time, direction, things like that. You know, when you throw a spear, that was the quirk. Throwing was the quirk of evolution. Maybe it wasn't throwing, maybe it was more basic than that, is the first time we use something as a tool. The first time we understood that we could use something external to us to aid. I mean, these are all just kind of like simpler generalizations of, I mean, it's kind of going down the conceptual phylogenetic tree, but it isn't that is the same as saying going to the where they branched off, and it's like, oh, because of that thing, because of that mutation, which we're going to call a quirk, that gave us the ability. And anything that has that mutation, comes off that branch, can end up doing mathematics. I haven't answered that yet. If you could throw a spear, does that mean you already have developed the ability to do pure mathematics, or that you are on the branch of creatures that can develop that ability? Or have you already developed it because you're throwing a spear? I mean, you'd think that just you throw the spear, it isn't something that you've got to consciously, it's not like consciously taking square roots and, infinities and shit like that, which is what, I want to think about when I think pure mathematics. But it's got to be somewhere so far up that road or that track that, well, let's look at it from a, let's get anthropomorphic for a minute and just say, okay, well, humans can definitely do pure mathematics, at least some humans. Can monkeys and chimpanzees? We don't think so. Can octopi, dolphins, whales? We don't think so. Could be wrong about that. Crows can do impressive feats where they have some knowledge of physics and even mathematics, but is that, I don't think we would call that pure. Like somehow some implied it's there, but I don't know. We really have to. I really would have to know a more concrete definition of pure mathematics. But let's just say it's what humans can do and the other animals can't for now, so that we can move forward. I was thinking maybe it's the concept of the self, of kind of an integrated self that humans have. We don't really know if other animals have that in the same way, but I think that's maybe a matter of more degree than a binary. I think there's something where a dog is maybe some concept of itself. Certainly, probably more in mammals or in dolphins and elephants. I keep coming back to this idea that the quirk that caused us to have the ability to develop religions and mythology and folklore is probably the same. That same thing caused us the ability to be able to do pure mathematics. Something about abstraction, something about synthesis, something about the idea of a reality that isn't manifest in the the world as we see it. All these things are things that I think mathematics has in common with things like proto religions and religions and that type of stuff. So what does that say? Belief? What is belief? What is belief? And is the quirk of evolution the concept of belief? The concept of belief is tied up all in consciousness and that kind of stuff. I might need one more sip before I figure this out for sure. Could it have something to do with something like if some type of being forced to think of I was thinking like a tribe that grows to beyond a number that, say, you can just kind of a human can just hold in their head or something. Like, okay, they have to kind of abstract the idea of the tribe, which is more than you can just look, walk out and look up and know that's the tribe. If somehow there's a just a simple, like, almost growth of the concept, almost a physical growth of like a tribe or something that just it forces one to like group something, which is to group something is to create a new entity which wasn't there before. It's to create like a hierarchy, and all of a sudden you've got, and once you have to do that, then you've already got abstractions there. So maybe it's as simple as something like having to find a way to create the concept of a group because something is important for your evolution, for your continued viability, that needs to be abstracted into something like what we would call a group. And you don't have, and you can't just go like this, So, yes, William H. Press. The answer to your last question, which is what quirk of evolution caused us to develop the ability to do pure mathematics, that quirk was needing to keep track of more members of the tribe than we could think of in our head, which caused us to create the idea of a group, which is the first abstraction, which is boom. And once you get the first abstraction, everything flows from there. So, thank you, William H. Press, for that question. Who do we got next here? Doink a doink. Next, we have Robert Provine, who is Professor Emeritus at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and author of Curious Behavior, Yawning, Laughing, Hiccuping, and Beyond, which makes me think of the expression of emotions in humans, or was it something like that? One of Darwin's more underrated books. But anywho, Robert's last question is: can a single underlying process explain the emergence of structure at the physical, biological, cognitive, and machine levels? Yes. Yeah. Yes, it can. I love these yes/no questions because they're nice and easy to answer. Just yes, absolutely. Yes, Robert. Let's go a little further. The emergence of structure at the physical, biological, biological is a subset of physical, of course. Cognitive, you certainly want to say cognitive is a subset of the biological, but that becomes philosophical, doesn't it? And then machine, we would say, yeah, that's a subset of the cognitive because it's coming from us, but that's not necessarily the only way to think of this. But I have been thinking more lately that the universe is just mathematics' way to manifest mathematics. It's like a chicken is just an egg's way of making another egg. Physical reality, we'll say, is just is just the is physical reality is the genitals of mathematics. I am kind of leading in that direction, so I am kind of thinking that, yeah, a lot of this is just a lot of the things that we say are different at physical, biological, cognitive, and machine levels are just particular species of fundamental mathematical principles that are unfolding everywhere all the time, like fractally, in some sense, like almost fractally. The question is, though, is how much can a process explain? What is a process, and to what extent can a process explain? I don't know that that's easy as we would like it to be. It's annoying. That's why I need to focus on the question, the answer, and not Tiny Tim. Is mathematics a process? It's hard to really conceptualize it that way, but if you could do you think of mathematics as kind of like the as the continual filling up of the space of possibility? That sounds weird, but it's just like it almost sounds like a cheat to just say what can exist will somewhere or another, and so what we see existing is the manifestation of some portion of what can exist will, and that's the most basic idea of mathematics. Sounds too easy, although I haven't been wrong yet, so I may just not have enough confidence in myself. So this would be 235 for 235, I think. And he's talking about the emergence of structure. How do we define structure? You think we know it? Is structure the same as organized complexity? I don't know that it is. Man, there's so many areas here where even mortal minds could get trapped a little bit here. Obviously, we've already answered this question correctly, and I answered as yes. So that's out of the way. So the rest of this is just frosting. I mean, what would we call structure at the physical level? And the emergence of it. So do you mean physics? Is physics the emergence of structure at the physical level? Is the way that our conception of atoms, our conception of quarks and down to what, bosons and fermions or whatever, that structure at the physical level. Can a single underlying process explain that structure at that level? And I think so. I just think it's yeah. An economist and an architect walk into a bar. The bartender walks up and says, "What are you having?" And they both say in unison, Structure. I think it's about did I freaking lose that again? Excuse me. Piece of crap. Yeah, I think it's about an economist and an architect walk into a bar. So my riffing, Robert Provine, excuse me. The answer to your last question is yes. But to know what exactly the underlying process is, you need to get together with an economist, an architect, get them really drunk, and make them play rock, paper, scissors, and that'll get you your answer as to exactly what the process is. And that is the process. Next, we have Matthew Putman, who's an applied physicist, chairman of the board at Pioneer Works, and CEO of Nanotronics. And his Matthew's last question is, will questioning be replaced by answering without questions? Oh, wow. Oh, it's another simple one. Will questioning be replaced by answering without questions? Oh. Of course, the first intellectual swipe at that wants to say it doesn't even make any sense. You can't. Well, what good does an answer without a question be? Let's think of it. Let's boil it down. Let's boil it down very simply. Okay. Let's say we're in the game of life or something like that, or we're on a checkerboard, and there's a piece on a checkerboard, and it can move or it can not move. Does the move or not move necessarily is it predicate that it needs to ask a question, move or not move? Or is it going to just move or not move? Do you have to conceive of that? Do you have to conceive of the board as like, okay, well, this piece can move or not move? Or can something just move or not move because can we get rid of why, what, where, when, why, how? Well, the easy way to answer this is because you said will, which can just be answered in the affirmative or the negative. So I will be answering you in Jimmy Stewart faster by going, no. That's a terrible Jimmy. That's the worst Jimmy Stewart ever been done. And Mr. Ed did a better Jimmy Stewart than. Okay. So the answer I already have is no. So anything else after that's gravy. Can you even think about a questionless answer? What would that look like? I'm driving. I need to go somewhere. I don't need to go somewhere. I could just go somewhere, and the answer is this, the answer is that. There is no inherent question. There is only possibility. I almost feel like it's taking the locus of control and just removing it from the agent. Well, it's at least conceptualizing a system where there are no agents. If there are no agents, there are no answers. Could he also be saying, I think that's too cheeky. That's too. It would have been phrased differently if it was like, if the questions were already known, so that the it's not that there aren't questions, but they're just telepathically thought of. But that's not where he's going with that, I don't think. Almost like you could like be like, hey Google, and then it gives you the answer because it just, oh, shut up Google.
Your phone's mobile data is turned off, so I can't help you with that at the moment.
Shut up, go away. Why is my, excuse me, 1 second. Why is my mobile data turned off? This is the exciting part of this. Mobile data isn't turned off. It's turned frickin' on. Wi-Fi is turned on, but not connected somehow. Anywho, questioning can be replaced by answering without questions. God, I hope not. That would be I wouldn't exactly be Charlie Wonka in the Chocolate Factory. Willy Wonka, Charlie Rose in the Rose Garden. Man, I mean, really, I'm going to perfect this answer. I'm whittling this thing down. Answering without questions. What would that even look like? What would an answer without a question look like? I'm just like visualizing something almost like this web of connectedness where connections just work and go from place, but This seems to be such an entirely philosophical reconceptualization that it's almost like saying, it's almost like it seems to me like it's almost really like a question about free will. Like it's going to boil down to like a type of conceptualization that is, I don't know, coterminous with something like, is free will a thing, which I think is not really that interesting a question, actually. The more I freely think about free will, the more I freely think it's not an interesting question to think about. If you think about things as kind of like a network, so whatever system you have, like if you've got like little agents in a network that don't know anything and they're trying to make their way, but then they become connected with another part of the network, other parts of the network, so their knowledge of the rest of the physical whatever where they're in becomes integrated with the rest of whatever system it is. And so you don't have to question as much about where to go, let's just say, because you don't know where everything is, because you do know where everything is, because you're part of this connected system. So, does the system has to ask itself where one node needs to transfer something or something? Like, it doesn't make sense to consider a network to be asking questions about itself, because the network just is the thing. What kind of thing could answer I think for this to make sense, you almost have to transfer consciousness. You have to distribute consciousness. You also have to figure out why you can't keep this stupid camera to actually run for frickin'. Anything like consciousness would have to be distributed throughout a system, I feel like. You can't have an agent. Could this just be about perfect and imperfect information too? Well, if you have perfect information, you don't even have answers, right? Everything is known. Could the questioning being replaced be synonymous with the difference between, let's just say, actors with imperfect information and actors with perfect information, and that rides kind of on the tails of, you can't have perfect information and be unconnected with. You can't have perfect information without being connected to the rest of the system which contains the information. So you have to spread consciousness around the system. And that gives you some semblance of a more idea, at least, of perfect information, which says you don't have to ask questions because it's already there. It's just you're operating in a framework where questions don't make sense, but movement does. So, Matthew Putman, the answer to your last question, which is, will questioning be replaced by answering without questions? The answer to that is yes, but you will not be able to play poker there. Thank you for that interesting question. Let's see if I got one more in me. David C. Queller is an evolutionary biologist at Washington University in St. Louis, which quite honestly, threw me for a curveball there. Washington University in St. Louis, and David's last question is, must we suffer and die? Ours is not to reason why, ours is but to do and die, as said by the famous poet and sage Gallagher. In between his performances with Watermelon, must we suffer and die? I hate to start, going into definitions. But let's say die is a little more concretely defined than suffer is. But man, even suffering is like, there's so much packed into the word suffer that, like, a real philosopher, who I, am not, and whatever, but you could literally get into, you could spend a career on that word. You could spend a career on what is suffering. You could also spend a career on what is life and death, but that would also be, you'd have to have a conversation with the biologist and maybe the physicist, where the province of suffering maybe is more the province of the philosopher. And it has to do with consciousness more so than death, There is some part of suffering which has to be subjective. think we can say objective. I think death we can say can be a little bit more of a binary state. That suffering is, I don't want to be a philosopher because I want to encompass the fact that we can all experience suffering the same way, or the lack of suffering, or jubilation, or whatever, or at least creatures, biological creatures, because that would allow me to increase my kind of circle of compassion, empathy. Singer talks about that. If I start saying that we don't suffering is subjective and we don't have to talk about suffering and stuff like that, then you can get down the road of, oh, okay, well then I guess chickens don't feel pain when we I don't want to go down that road, but I think at least at a certain theoretical, cognitive, conceptual level, whatever, suffering is somewhat, it's like we have an orgasm. I mean, it's actually it's like pain, but it feels good. So there is some kind of elasticity to, people work out and it hurts their bodies, but it feels good, What the hell is suffering? It is a must we? I think they're potentially two different questions, because suffering almost it would be hard to know suffering without, well, how could you know the lack of suffering or joy if you didn't understand it in the context of suffering? Like those things, it's like they kind of define each other. Is it the same way with death? Probably. Who are you calling this we? It's that thing I come back to all the time. It's getting to be a cheat code or something, but what is we? Because are you thinking individual humans, Sir David? Are you seeing that? Is that the level of which you're looking at this? And I mean, it's the obvious initial level. It's like, oh, must we suffer and die? So it's must humans. And it's like, okay, so must. But if we think about it as like humanity or as a species, does the concept of suffering and dying, do they even make sense? They make sense at an individual level. Do they make sense if we're conceptualizing things at different levels? I don't think it has as much purchase. Those words don't have the same type of, purchase that they do at the individual level. So if I'm just saying we as a human agent, if we're not conscious, is suffering still on the plate? Is a certain level of consciousness necessary for suffering? And is the level of consciousness, as a level is one's ability to suffer, does that rise and fall with one's level of consciousness? I probably think so. I want to say we it isn't necessarily that we suffer and die, but without the suffering and death, we don't get any of the good stuff. I think that's the price to pay. Suffering and death is the price you pay for conscious experience. Or at least the recognition of suffering and death is the price you pay for an awareness of existence in the first place. So you don't have to suffer and die, but if you want to be aware of existence and experience existence, then you kind of need to. Suffering and death are probably just built in. They're certainly built into humanity as we think of it now, or as we can conceptualize it now. Is it just kind of hardwired logical necessities of I think it's kind of hardwired into if there is an experience, an awareness of experience, then suffering is baked into anything with an awareness of experience. Because there's people that become, comatose, and we think that they have no, either so little a consciousness or no consciousness, and so they're not seen to suffer. And some do die, but they don't suffer. Well, at least we don't think they do, and because they have no consciousness. Could we get uploaded into the cloud and avoid death? Could we avoid death even if we can't avoid suffering? Because I still think there's something conceptually about, like, even if we go up into the cloud, if we can't suffer, we probably can't be conscious. But could we cheat death just by getting upgrades all the time? Then I think we have to start talking about, that's the moment where we have to start redefining what we mean by die. Then we have to, I think that's the moment. Suffering is, I think, it's baked into consciousness. Death may not be baked into consciousness. Death may have to be redefined. Suffering's just there, but death needs to start to be redefined. So the answer to your last question, David C. Queller, which is, must we suffer and die? The answer to that is suffering, no, but if you're going to be conscious, then yes. Death, we have to talk about death. We don't necessarily have to die. We don't have to die. We do have to suffer. Yeah. So, thank you for that question. And I am now, I think, 137 for 137, something like that, in that area. I'm just going to like 237 for 237. 137 would not be a big deal for these questions, but 237, that's like, I'm the cognitive Hank Aaron. Anyway, so I think I am going to call that an evening and hopefully get this up in 2020 still so I can heal the world like I have been doing. And we will continue the upward trajectory, which I started back in, and I think early 2020, where I started this series. And, like early March, I started this series, and just everything about the world has been getting better and better and better since March of 2020. And I think it has directly co-aligns or aligns with this project that I've been doing. So I'm humbled a little bit. I would say I'm surprised at the level of perfection that I've accomplished here, but it's just becoming part of the course. Okay. Anyway, thanks for all those interesting questions, and we are into the Q's. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, Q. So we're like over halfway done. So this is exciting. So all right, we'll see you on the flip side. Thanks for hanging in there. And Kia Sorrento.